black SUV had been sitting outside Rowan Financial for 11 days before Tessa Gaunt even noticed it. She noticed most things. That was the problem, and the gift of being the woman everyone looked through. Tessa had learned early in her 29 years that invisibility was its own kind of superpower. When you were the fat girl in the room, when your hips were wide and your stomach soft, and your thighs pressed together at every seam, people stopped seeing you as a person and started seeing you as furniture, as backdrop, as wallpaper. So you watched. You filed things away. You noticed the black SUV with the cracked rear mud flap and the Pennsylvania plates parked half a block down from her office building every morning before 7, gone before 6. On the 12th day, the man leaning against it looked directly at her. She walked faster and didn't look back. Tessa worked as a forensic accountant for Rowan Financial, a mid-sized firm in downtown Philadelphia that handled portfolio management for clients whose net worth kept the elevators running smooth and the marble floors freshly polished. She was not supposed to be there if you asked the HR director, who had passed over her application twice before a retiring partner had plucked it from the pile and called her in himself. She had a degree from a state school. She wore blazers from the clearance rack at Macy's. She took public transit. None of that fit the profile of the women who moved through those offices in tailored sheaths and Ferragamo flats. But she could trace a forged transaction across 14 shell accounts in under 3 hours. And that, as the retiring partner had told the board, was not a skill you walked away from. She had been there 4 years. She ate lunch at her desk. She stayed late. She did not go to the holiday parties. She had not until recently attracted the attention of anyone whose name she didn't recognize. The name she didn't recognize arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the form of a manila folder left in her secure inbox by the firm's senior partner, Douglas Park. The client's name was printed neatly on the tab, Column Holdings, LLC. She opened it without particular interest and then sat very still for a long time. The holding company was a ghost, clean on the surface, quarterly filings, standard disclosures, a board of 3 names she couldn't find anywhere online. Beneath that surface, the money moved in patterns she had seen before in a training module about offshore obfuscation she had practically memorized. Someone was cycling funds through a constellation of LLCs spread across Delaware, the Cayman Islands, and a small trust office in Luxembourg, and they were doing it with extraordinary precision. Whoever had built this structure was smart. They were very nearly invisible. Nearly. Tessa pulled her yellow legal pad from her desk drawer and began to write. She did not know, working late in her glass-walled office on the 14th floor, that the man who owned Calumdre Holdings was standing in the lobby of her building, watching the glow of her office light from across the atrium. His name was Calumdre. He was 41. He had the kind of face that made people nervous to look at directly, not because it was ugly, but because it wasn't. Sharp jaw, dark eyes, a scar that ran from his left temple to his cheekbone from a disagreement that had ended badly for the other party. He wore bespoke suits and moved with the contained precision of a man who never wasted energy on anything he hadn't already decided to do. His legitimate holdings, tech infrastructure, freight logistics, a construction firm in the Northeast, generated enough tax revenue to make the DA's office maintain a respectful distance. His other operations ran cleaner and deeper and touched things the DA's office would have needed a very long ladder to reach. He had been told about the forensic accountant on a Tuesday. "She's asking questions," his CFO had told him over a scrambled line. "The Park firm assigned her to the holding company audit. She's not going to find anything, Callum. The structure's airtight." "Nothing is airtight," Callum had said, and hung up. He had pulled her employee file that evening. Theresa Ann Gaunt, 29, double major, accounting and mathematics, summa cum laude, Temple University. 5 commendations in 4 years at Rowan Financial, 3 of which related to catching fraud that 2 senior partners had missed. No social media presence to speak of. No husband, no boyfriend listed on her emergency contact forms. Her emergency contact was a woman named Patricia Gaunt, Her mother, a retired school librarian in Abington. He had looked at her employee photo for a long time. Round face. Dark eyes that were doing something complicated behind the camera, something that didn't quite resolve into a smile. Brown hair pulled back at the nape of her neck. He had sent the SUV on a Tuesday. He had come himself on a Thursday. Now he was watching her office light, the only one still burning on the 14th floor at 8:15 in the evening, and he was doing the math. He had been doing the math wrong. He'd expected to walk into this situation and find someone manageable, someone who could be redirected, promoted laterally into a role that wouldn't touch his accounts, or quietly paid out with a performance bonus large enough to dull the edges of professional curiosity. He had managed forensic accountants before. It was an unpleasant but navigable category of problem. He had not expected her to crack the Luxembourg Trust in 11 days. His legal team had built that particular layer to absorb a minimum of 3 weeks of professional scrutiny. 11 days meant she wasn't just good. It meant she was exceptional, and exceptional problems required different solutions. The elevator doors opened. He stepped inside. Tessa was so deep in the filing that she didn't hear the elevator. She didn't hear the quiet footsteps on the carpeted floor of the otherwise empty office. The first thing she registered was a shadow falling across her legal pad, and she spun hard in her chair, her heart slamming into her ribcage. The man standing in her doorway was the man from the SUV. He was bigger up close. She had noticed the breadth of his shoulders from a distance. Standing in the frame of her office door in a charcoal suit, hands in his pockets, he looked like someone who had been assembled specifically to take up space and make other people feel they should be taking up less. "Tessa Gaunt," he said. His voice was low and even. "Not a question. The office is closed," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she deserved. Given that her heart rate had just crossed a threshold she was fairly certain her doctor would disapprove of. "Building security, Will. Building security is on break." He stepped inside. "I'm not here to threaten you. I want you to understand that clearly before we continue." She looked at the manila folder on her desk, then at him. She was not a stupid woman. "Callum Dre," she said. Something moved across his face. It was brief and it was not quite surprise, but it was close to it. "You recognized me. I found a photograph in a 2019 deposition filing from a federal civil case. You were a witness for the defense." She kept her voice level. "You were also listed as a secondary signatory on the Harwick Trust through a name variation. Calvin D. Harwick. It took me until this morning." He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her desk and sat down in it, in the manner of a man who sat down wherever he liked without asking. He looked at her across the desk. She looked back. "You should have taken 2 more weeks," he said. "I work fast, I know." He leaned back. "I've read your file, Miss Gaunt, your commendations. The Perkins audit in 2022, where you recovered $4 million in misattributed assets that 2 senior partners had signed off on. The Delacroix matter in 2023. He paused. "You're wasted here." Tessa said nothing. She had learned, young, that silence was a better negotiating position than almost anything else, and she had learned it the hard way. "I'm not going to threaten your job," Callum said. "I'm not going to threaten you at all. I'm going to make you an offer, and you're going to take some time to think about it." She stared at him. "You came to my office at 8 in the evening to make me an offer. I came to your office at 8 in the evening because it's the only time you're here alone." His dark eyes held steady on hers. "I don't have this conversation in front of witnesses." The offer was not what she expected. It was not a bribe. It was a job, her own portfolio, her own team, a salary that made her blink twice at the number he named, an arrangement that would be entirely legal, entirely structured, and would involve her auditing his legitimate holdings to ensure that his legal operations ran clean enough to withstand any scrutiny that might otherwise wander in the direction of the rest. "You want to hire me to make your legal money look legal," she said, "so that no one looks too closely at your illegal money." "I want to hire you," Callum said, Because you are the best forensic accountant I've encountered in 20 years of dealing with forensic accountants, and I want you working for me instead of against me. I could still report what I've found." "You could," he agreed. "What you have is suggestive but not actionable. You know that. What you haven't found yet would take you another 6 weeks, and by then the structure will have changed." He stood. "Think about it, Miss Gaunt. Take a week." He left. She sat in her empty office for a long time, staring at the legal pad, and tried to understand the feeling in her chest that was equal parts fear and something else she didn't have a clean word for. She took 4 days. Then she called the number on the business card he'd left on her desk. The position came with an office on the 32nd floor of a building in Center City that Callum Dre owned outright. It came with a car service. It came with a team of 3 junior analysts who were competent and frightened of their new director in equal measure, which Tessa found she did not entirely hate. It came with access to systems and structures she had spent 4 years trying to see around from the outside. It did not come with proximity to Callum Dre. That surprised her a little. He had sought her out personally, appeared in her office doorway like a piece of expensive furniture that had materialized from nowhere, and then installed her in the 32nd floor and proceeded to be almost entirely absent. She met with his CFO, a quiet man named Aldrich Sen, twice a week. She submitted reports that went up a chain she could trace but not see past. She rebuilt the financial architecture of 3 legitimate holding companies from the ground up and made them structurally impenetrable. She was good at her work and she knew it, and she did not need to be told. She told herself, firmly and repeatedly, that she was not thinking about where Callum Dre was or what he was doing or why he had chosen her. She was, of course, lying. 6 weeks in, she was in the office at 11 at night. This was not unusual. What was unusual was that she had pulled up a secondary file that had nothing to do with her official portfolio. A thread she'd noticed in the Calder subsidiary that didn't resolve cleanly, a small discrepancy in a freight routing invoice that had the specific fingerprint of something being moved that wasn't freight. She was not supposed to be in this file. She was not officially sanctioned to be in this file. She opened it anyway, because she was constitutionally incapable of not pulling a thread that bothered her. She was so deep in it that she didn't hear the elevator. "What are you listening to?" She yanked her earbuds out and spun around. Callum Dre was leaning in the doorway of her office, her new office, her actual office. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the view of City Hall, in a white dress shirt with the collar open and the sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked like he had been somewhere that required a suit and had shed it in pieces on the way here. His tie was gone. His jacket was gone. There was a faint tension along his jaw that suggested the evening had not been entirely pleasant. She pulled the earbud from her hand and looked at it. She had forgotten she was even wearing them. She'd been playing a playlist she only listened to when she was alone, old Motown, heavy on the bass, the kind of music that moved in her chest before it reached her ears. "Nothing," she said. "You were singing," he said. The floor dropped out from under her. "I was not. Under your breath." He walked in without being invited, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he moved through the world, and sat down in the chair across from her desk. He looked at her in the way he had the first night, direct, unhurried, as if he had time to do this, and had decided to use it on her specifically. "What are you working on?" Calder. "Freight routing. That's not your file." "No." She held his gaze. "There's a discrepancy." He was quiet. Then, what kind of discrepancy? She turned the monitor toward him and walked him through it, point by point, because she had built the habit of not being embarrassed about what she knew. She watched his face as she talked. He was listening, actually listening, not performing attention the way most people did when she explained something they didn't understand. He was tracking it. "You found that tonight," he said. "I found it 3 days ago. I confirmed it tonight." Another silence. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and looked at the numbers. He was close enough that she could see the scar along his temple, in detail, and the line of dark ink that ran up his forearm beneath the rolled sleeve, and she made herself look at the monitor instead. "How long until it becomes a problem?" he said. 60 days if someone routes another shipment through that hub. Less if your freight manager gets audited independently." 60 days, he repeated. He looked at her. "Fix it. That's not what I was hired to. I know what you were hired to do." He stood. "I'm expanding the scope. You'll have access to the Calder structure by Monday." He picked up his jacket from the back of the chair. She hadn't noticed when he draped it there, and paused. "What are you still doing here at 11, Tessa?" It was the first time he'd used her first name. She felt it land somewhere she would not have predicted. "I work late," she said, "every night." It wasn't a question. He looked at her for a moment that extended a beat past professional. "Go home." He left. She sat in the chair for a long time, looking at the door. The next 3 weeks were different. She didn't know how to name the difference except that Callum Dre was present in a way he hadn't been before. Not in her office, not exactly, but close to it. He stopped routing everything through Aldrich. He called her directly in the evenings to talk through structural questions that Aldrich could have answered. He appeared in the building at odd hours, and always managed to be in the corridor when she was leaving. He did not comment on this, she did not comment on it. There was a conversation happening that neither of them was saying out loud. She noticed, she filed it away. She told herself it was not relevant. The morning everything changed was a Tuesday in March, cold enough that frost still gripped the ledges of the upper floors. Tessa arrived at the building at 6:45, which was earlier than usual, because she had 3 presentations to prepare and a meeting at 8 she was already dreading. She came through the lobby, nodded to the security desk, and stepped into the elevator. She did not notice, until the elevator doors were closing, that 2 men had come in behind her. She did not recognize either of them. That was the first signal, because she knew everyone who worked in this building. 4 weeks in, she had made it her business. One of them was broad, 40s, and had the particular stillness of someone trained to stand in doorways and wait. The other was younger, angular, and was looking at a point on the wall instead of at her, which was the second signal, because people on elevators looked at the floor or the doors, not the wall. She had her phone in her hand before the doors finished closing. She didn't get to use it. The broad one took it from her with a practiced efficiency that suggested he had done this before. "Easy," he said. "We just want to talk. Who do you work for?" Her voice came out level. She was proud of that. "That's the conversation," the younger one said. The elevator was stopped between floors when she realized they were not going to let her leave the way she'd come in. She was very still. She was calculating exits, angles, the weight differential between herself and the broad man holding her phone, the probability that the younger one was armed under the left side of his jacket. She was running numbers the same way she ran numbers on a spreadsheet, and arriving at answers she did not like. The broad man said a name she recognized. It was the name of a man whose operation overlapped with a freight route she had restructured 2 weeks ago. An operation that had, as a result of that restructuring, lost access to a logistics corridor it had been quietly using for something Tessa now understood was not freight. Her restructuring had cost someone a great deal of money. She was the loose end. The conversation they wanted to have involved a document she was not going to sign, which would have transferred certain accounting authorizations to a shell entity she had never heard of, and which would have made her legally complicit in something she was not willing to be complicit in. "I need to think about it," she said. "You have until tonight," the broad man said. The elevator resumed. The doors opened on the 32nd floor, and they let her walk out, and she stood in the corridor outside her office and breathed for 30 seconds in a way that was not quite panic and not quite not panic. And then she went inside and sat down and called Callum Dre. He answered on the second ring, which was not something she had expected at 6:50 in the morning. She told him what had happened. All of it, cleanly, without edging around the parts that were frightening. He was quiet while she talked. The quality of his silence changed about halfway through, in a way she couldn't have described precisely, but could feel through the phone. It went from listening to something else. "Don't leave the floor," he said when she finished. "Lock your office door. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He was there in 14. He was not alone. He came with two men she had never seen before, who spread out through the corridor with a practiced quiet that told her they were not from his legal operations. He came in her office, and he looked at her the way he had looked at the discrepancy in the Calder file, cataloguing, assessing, arriving at conclusions. Except that this time, whatever conclusion he arrived at did something to the set of his jaw that she had not seen before. "Are you hurt?" "No." He crossed the room and took her face in both hands, carefully, with the same precision he brought to everything, and looked at her, close and direct, checking what she'd said for the truth. She was aware of the warmth of his palms and the rough edge of the scar that brushed her cheekbone, and the fact that she had forgotten, for a brief moment, to breathe. "I'm fine," she said again, more firmly. He let her go. He pulled out his phone. What happened over the next 6 hours was something Tessa followed only partially, because it moved through channels she couldn't fully see. Phone calls in the corridor, made in a voice too low to pass. Aldrich arrived and was given instructions that turned him pale. She was moved with her laptop and her legal pads to a conference room with no external windows, and two of the quiet men stood outside the door. By 3 in the afternoon, Callum came back in. "It's handled," he said. She looked at him. He was disheveled in a way she had not seen before. Jacket gone, shirt collar open 2 buttons, the set of his shoulders carrying something that had not been there this morning. She did not know exactly what handled meant and understood, with a clarity she had developed over 6 weeks of learning the architecture of his world, that she was not going to ask. "The men in the elevator," she said instead. "They knew about the restructuring, which means someone here told them." His expression didn't change. "Yes, it was the freight manager. The one I flagged to you 6 weeks ago." A pause. "How long have you known?" "Since last week. I wasn't certain." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to tell me next time." "I wasn't sure it was relevant, Tessa." He said it quietly, but it landed with weight. "If it involves your safety, it is always relevant." She looked down at the legal pad in front of her. There was something in the way he said her name, something she kept cataloguing and not knowing how to file. 2 weeks after the elevator, Tessa came in on a Saturday morning to finish a report she wanted cleared before Monday. The building was empty. The 32nd floor was hers alone. She made coffee in the small kitchen, brought it back to her office, and opened her laptop. And then she did something she only did when she was absolutely certain no one was watching. She put her earbuds in, turned the Motown playlist all the way up, and she sang. She had a decent voice. She knew this the way she knew most things about herself, privately, without advertising it. Singing was the thing she kept separate from everything else she was, because everything else she was had been evaluated and measured and found wanting or found sufficient at various points in her life, but singing she kept clean. She sang the way she worked late and the way she understood money, with complete absorption, no performance, just the actual thing. She was on her feet. She did this, sometimes, when the song was right, moved around the office swaying unself-conscious in a way she almost never permitted herself to be in daylight. Her hips moved, her shoulders rolled. She raised one arm, turning, her hair loose for once, her eyes closed, and she let herself take up every inch of space in the room. She was not the woman who wore clearance rack blazers. She was not the woman no one invited to the holiday party. She was a girl in her childhood bedroom, with the door locked and the music loud. She turned. Callum Dre was in the doorway. He was completely still. He was in a jacket that suggested he'd come from somewhere and stopped here on the way, or instead of somewhere else. His expression was the most unguarded she had ever seen it, which was not very unguarded, but it was more than nothing, and what it contained was something she had not expected from this man. She yanked the earbuds from her ears. Her heart was in her throat. The heat that flooded her face was the particular, scorching humiliation of being seen doing something you'd kept entirely private, something that had nothing to do with the person you presented to the world. "How long were you standing there?" she said. It came out flat. "Long enough," he said. He didn't move. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at the Calder numbers, except that there was something else in it now, and she did not know how to run the numbers on that something else. You should have said something. She was already reaching for her bag, for her laptop, for the professional apparatus that would restore the appropriate distance between them. Don't. He stepped inside. She stopped. "You don't have to do that. I'm at work," she said. It was unprofessional. It was Saturday morning. You were alone. He walked toward her with the same controlled deliberateness that characterized everything he did, and he stopped close enough that she had to tilt her face to look at him. "You stopped the moment you saw me." "Obviously." "Why?" She blinked. "Because I was singing," he said, "moving, being something outside of numbers and filings and things that need to be fixed." He said it plainly, without cruelty, in that direct way that she had come to understand was not bluntness but a specific refusal to waste words. "You spend an enormous amount of energy making yourself smaller." The words hit her somewhere undefended. She had built those defenses young and layered them carefully, and they were very good, and he had just walked through them like they weren't there. That's not. You eat at your desk and you leave after everyone else, and you don't speak in meetings unless you're certain what you're about to say is correct, which is always, but you wait anyway. He was not moving away. He was not doing the thing people did, where they softened criticism with apology. He was saying a thing he had apparently observed and decided to say, "You know how exceptional you are, but you act like someone who is waiting for permission to be in the room." "Callum." Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I heard you from the elevator," he said. "I heard you and I stood there instead of announcing myself, and I know that was wrong. But I watched you and you were." He stopped. His jaw worked once, like he was deciding something. "I've watched a lot of people in my life who weren't being watched. It's an occupational necessity. I've never watched anyone who looked like that." "Like what?" she said barely. "Like someone who had finally set something down." She looked at him. The morning light came through the window behind her, and he was in it, and she was in it, and the Motown playlist was still running on her phone, faint and far away, and the warmth that had flooded her face had changed into something else. He reached out. Very slowly, giving her every opportunity to move back, he tucked a loose piece of hair behind her ear. His fingers did not linger, but they did not retreat immediately either. "You're not too much," he said. "I want you to understand that clearly." She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The Tuesday it all collapsed. Tessa was in a client meeting on the 28th floor that ran 40 minutes long. She came back to 32 to find Aldrich waiting outside her office with an expression that she had never seen on his face and which she did not like. "What happened?" she said. "There's a federal inquiry," Aldrich said. "A sealed complaint filed last Thursday. Someone gave the FBI the Calder subsidiary structure. She went cold. She had locked that file. She had been the only one in it." "Who filed it?" she said. "We don't know yet." "Yes, we do." She was already moving toward her office. "The document request came in on what date?" "Thursday. The same day Callum told his board about expanding my access to the Calder structure." She sat down, opened her laptop. "Who was in that board meeting?" Aldrich said a name. She felt the shape of it land and already knew where the thread led. It took her 45 minutes to trace the filing back to its origin point, which was a legal consultant the board member had hired through a third party, which itself connected back to an entity she had seen before, a small LLC in Delaware she had flagged and then watched quietly for 3 months, waiting to understand its purpose. She understood its purpose now. It was the instrument by which a man named Gerald Renshaw, who had served on Callum's board for 8 years, was engineering his removal from the company structure he had built from nothing. She had the full picture in front of her when Callum walked in. She told him, She walked him through the entire chain, point by point, without editorializing. She showed him the connections, the timeline, the document she had pulled from an archived filing that placed Renshaw's legal consultant at the genesis of an earlier complaint in 2019 that had targeted a competitor Renshaw had subsequently absorbed. She showed him that it had been done before, and how and why and what it meant. He stood at the window while she talked, his back to her, looking at the city. When she finished, he was very still. "He was with me from the beginning," he said. "I know." She was quiet. She let him have the silence. He turned. His face was composed, but there was something behind it. She recognized because she had felt it herself. That particular kind of quiet that descended when someone you had trusted without reservation had spent years being untrustworthy. "How do we bury it?" he said. She had a legal pad on the desk in front of her. "We don't bury it. We answer it." She pushed the pad toward him. "I've been building a structure for the last 3 months that creates enough separation between the Calder operations and the holding company to make the complaint non-actionable. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure whether the threat was internal. I know now." He looked at the legal pad. He looked at her. "You've been protecting the company from a threat you identified 3 months ago," he said slowly, "without telling me." "I protect things," she said. "That's what I do. I don't announce it. I fix it." He sat down. He put his hands flat on the desk. He looked at her across the space between them, and there was something in his face that had not been there before. Something that went past appreciation, past professional respect, past whatever had happened in the Saturday morning light, with her hair down and the music still playing. "Why?" he said. She looked at him. "Because you came to my office at 8 in the evening and told me I was exceptional, and I believed you." She paused. "And because the work is good work." He was quiet for a long time. "I need you to understand something," he said finally. He said it carefully, in the way he said things that mattered. "I have managed people for 20 years. I have compensated them and evaluated them, and when necessary moved them out of positions they could not sustain. I have not." He stopped. "I have not done this." "Done what?" she said. Sat across from someone and felt like the room had changed. The inquiry was answered. The complaint was withdrawn within 30 days on the basis of a legal argument constructed from documentation that Tessa had spent 3 months assembling without knowing exactly why she felt so strongly that it needed to exist. Gerald Renshaw resigned from the board 3 weeks later under circumstances that were described in the press release as mutual and amicable. Tessa wrote the press release. She was not, however, done. The night before the withdrawal was formally confirmed, she was back in the office at 11. She was always back in the office at 11, running a secondary cross-check on an unrelated holding structure when Callum came in. He came in, sat down in the chair across from her desk, and looked at her. "What are you listening to?" he said. "Nothing." She pulled an earbud out. The Motown playlist was playing again. He held out his hand. She stared at it for a moment. Then she put the earbud in his palm. He fit it into his ear. She watched him listen to the opening bars of something slow and heavy bass, and she watched the thing that happened on his face when the music reached him, and she thought, "I am not going to recover from this man." He didn't say anything. He just looked at her, with the earbud in, the music playing between them. "Sing," he said. "No, Tessa, absolutely not." The edge of his mouth moved. It was the closest thing she had seen to an actual smile on that carefully composed face, and it did something to her chest she was not prepared for. "Some other time, then," he said. He held the earbud back out to her. When she took it, his fingers closed briefly around hers. Not long, not theatrically, just enough. He stood to go. At the door he stopped. "There's a dinner," he said. "Thursday. The partners from the Aldrin Group. I need someone who can hold a conversation about the freight restructure and also—" He stopped. He looked at her directly, that dark, level gaze. "I want you there, as mine." She understood what he was saying. She held his gaze. "That's a different kind of position," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She thought about it for 3 seconds, which was longer than she usually took to arrive at a conclusion she'd already reached. Thursday, she said. Fine. The Aldrin dinner was at a restaurant in Old City that had been closed for the private event. It was the kind of room that made Tessa aware, at a cellular level, of every place she had ever been told she did not belong. The women at the other tables were sleek and angular, and wore the kind of effortless that took 3 hours to assemble. She wore a deep blue dress she had bought 2 days ago from a woman-owned boutique in Rittenhouse, and she had spent 45 minutes standing in front of her mirror, wondering if the fabric moved right over her hips and stomach and thighs, and then she had put her earrings in and come anyway. Callum met her in the entrance. He looked at her when she walked in, and the look was not a survey. It was the look of someone who had been waiting for something to arrive and was satisfied that it had. "You look," he said, and then stopped, which was unusual for him. He started again. "You look like you know exactly where you're supposed to be." "I'm figuring it out," she said honestly. He offered his arm, and she took it, and they walked into the room together. She knew the Aldrin structure well enough to hold the conversation, and she held it well, asking the questions that revealed she had done the reading and then somes, redirecting when a senior partner attempted to corner Callum on a refinancing question by producing the relevant figures from memory. She watched Callum track her from across the table during those moments, something quiet and certain in his expression. After dinner, standing outside while the cars were brought around, a woman Tessa didn't recognize approached them. She was beautiful in the way women in Callum's orbit tended to be, and she looked at Tessa with the particular assessment that Tessa had learned to recognize. The quick scan, top to bottom, that concluded with an expression of polite incomprehension. "I didn't realize you'd brought someone," the woman said to Callum. "I did," Callum said. "And she's Tessa," he said in the tone that contained, beneath its evenness, a boundary so clear and solid it might as well have been a wall. His hand moved to the small of Tessa's back, not possessive, not theatrical, just present. Grounding. "She's the smartest person in this city, and she's with me, and we were about to leave." The woman's expression recalibrated. She excused herself. They stood on the pavement in the cold March air, and Tessa looked up at him. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I didn't do it because I had to." He looked down at her. "I did it because it's true, and because I've been watching you in rooms where no one saw you for long enough to want something different." She thought about all the rooms she'd sat in, all the lunches eaten alone, all the ways she'd learned to be efficient and indispensable, while never, under any circumstances, suggesting that she expected to be seen. "I'm not easy," she said. "I'm not going to be easy. I'm going to find things wrong with your structure at 11 at night, and I'm going to fix them without asking, and I'm going to take up a lot of space." "Good," he said. She looked at him. "Take up all of it," he said. 6 months later, the Callum Dre Holdings restructure was completed and filed with a cleanliness that his legal team described, privately and in writing, as the most elegant financial architecture they had encountered in their combined careers. The woman responsible for it held a title that read Head of Financial Integrity, which was accurate and entirely insufficient. At the annual Aldrin Group Summit, held in a ballroom in Center City that spring, the power landscape of the city's financial underground was represented in sharp-cut suits and careful expressions. Tessa stood at the center of it in a green dress she had chosen, with full knowledge of how it moved when she walked. She was not waiting to be seen. She was not taking up careful, apologetic inches. She had her notepad in her bag and 3 separate conversations happening across the room, and Callum's hand at the small of her back as she moved through it. An old partner from Rowan Financial appeared at her elbow, surprised and rearranging his expression too slowly. "Tessa, I didn't realize you were working," she offered pleasantly. He looked at Callum, he looked at Tessa. Something in the architecture of the evening clarified for him. "Of course," he said. "Of course you are." She smiled. It was not a performance. It was just the simple expression of a woman who had stopped apologizing for the space she occupied and found that the space had been waiting for her all along.